This week I'm talking with Debbie Babitt, who is the author of 3 books, but her most recent one is The Man on the Train, which is what we'll be talking about today. And it is just crazy suspenseful. It has the Hitchcockian suspense vibes that I really, really, really love in a book. So I was devouring this book as fast as I possibly could. So here's the synopsis. Manhattan Assistant District Attorney Linda Haley is awakened early one morning by 2 police officers at the door. She has no idea that her husband has been living a secret life during his daily commute into the city. Now Guy is the prime suspect in a brutal murder that could derail Linda's high-powered career and may be connected to a cold case. And Guy has disappeared. With a warrant out for his arrest, Linda travels to the scene of a 40-year-old unsolved murder and a night of violence that shattered the serenity of a fishing hamlet on the eastern end of Long Island. Aided and abetted by an ex-cop who's in love with her, she searches for evidence that could clear Guy's name. But as the manhunt intensifies and she begins to uncover the shocking truth and the past Guy has buried deep, Linda must decide if the stranger she married is innocent or guilty, and if he truly deserves to be saved. Hurtling down the tracks like a runaway train, this Hitchcockian thriller careens from a bedroom community to the Hamptons to a suburban train station where a killer hiding in plain sight waits to exact a final revenge. This is dual timeline, which I love, and also dual POV. We follow both people in this tumultuous marriage. And I was just hooked to this book. I had to know how everything was going to play out. I was reading when I was eating. I was reading when the dogs were outside. Like, I couldn't put it down. I loved it so much. And shout out to Gare for recommending this one to me. So I was super excited to talk to Debbie about it. So let's get into it. So I wanted to get to know a little bit about you before we dive into the book. So when did you know you wanted to write a book, or when did you know you wanted to be an author?
Well, it's interesting. I've always loved novels, always been a major reader. And I got a little sidetracked with acting and playwriting
Yes.
for a number of years, but I'd always loved to write. And I knew I had to stop acting when I started rewriting my lines. So that kind
Mm.
of segued into playwriting. And then after playwriting, it was very strange because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I mean, I love dialogue, but I also love books and thoughts and perspectives and descriptions. And a first person book's like a 400-page monologue. So
Mm-hmm.
I walked into a bookstore and I met a woman at the Harlequin romance stand. And I didn't want her to think I would read these romances. So I said to her, I'm thinking of writing one. And
Yeah.
she said, you're kidding. My sister's associate publisher at Harlequin and they need people to write the back covers.
Oh,
I
wow.
said, what do you mean? I could get paid to write back covers? So
Yeah.
she said, yes. I met her sister. She rips a cover off a book and says, write it. So I studied every book in the store and I started working for Harlequin. I made a portfolio and took it to all the houses,
Mm-hmm.
got a job. So I was freelancing for everybody. And then I got a job, offered a job as copy director at Penguin Putnam,
Mm.
which meant I'd have writers under me and freelancers and flap copy and 100 books a month. So to make a long
Wow.
story short, after all this hype copy I was writing for all these best-selling authors, I said, I'm going to write a book.
Yeah.
So I wrote a book, which was my first book, Saving Grace, and I sent it out. And luckily for me, I got an agent and he made a deal with Otto Penzler of Penzler
Yes.
Publishers, and the rest is history. All 3 of my books have been with Penzler. So it was a kind of roundabout route, but I have to say that being an actress really helped because I always start with character. And that's what taught me how to start with character, and everything flows from character.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I saw in your about section that you were an actress and a playwright and a copywriter, and you've kind of answered, but I don't know why I keep freezing.
Yeah.
But how did those experiences, do they affect how you write still?
That's a good question because with Saving Grace, this 11-year-old orphan in the South started talking to me. And then at the same time, her older self, 23 years later, as a sheriff, started talking to me. And the story started taking shape as I discovered their world. So that was how the first book worked. And actually, I think that's how I pretty much work. And then I have to work out the story and the plot and all that stuff, of course, because it's a
Yeah.
thriller. But with First Victim, it was similar in that I saw a courtroom and I saw a woman with a long black robe come through a door and sit on the bench. So I knew that was my main character, Alice.
Nice.
And same thing with the man on the train. You know, did the characters just come to me first and then the story takes shape? So, you know, the great Russian director Stanislavski said, character
Mhm.
is action. So for
Mm,
me, I want it to be organic and all the twists and turns, which are wonderful,
yeah.
reveals, reversals, they have to come from the character. It has to
Yeah.
be organic. And there are authors who start with a twist and then build
Mhm.
the characters. And
Yeah.
it just doesn't, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I've definitely heard both things. Like
Right. Yes.
some people even maybe they don't start with the twist, but they have some of the plot and they build the
Yes.
characters for the plot.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. It's crazy how many different ways you can write a book, basically.
I know, I know. And I guess because I'm character driven, I almost should be writing literary books, but I love mysteries and suspense. So when
Yes.
you're writing characters in a genre where plot really is paramount,
Hmm.
I have to find a way to make it all work and still be
Yeah.
fast-paced, etc., but character driven.
Well,
So
you figured it out. Otherwise, like, so it sounds like the characters just come to you, is what you're saying. And then do you start plotting it before you write, or do you just kind of start writing with the characters?
well, I used to talk into a recorder, which I would
Mm,
take everywhere because it was hard to write with pen and pad when I get ideas and like run off a machine at the gym. So
yeah.
I would talk into the recorder, which was never the writing, just ideas, dialogue, snippets, stuff about the character. And then I had to input it into the computer, which took hours because then new thoughts came and I'd have like
Yeah.
thousands of pages that wasn't even the book yet. So the thing is, when you sit down then to write the book, other things happen.
Yeah.
So you're organic in the moment. And that's something I wanted to talk about, which I've talked about a lot, which is that as an actor, you learn to be in the moment.
Mm,
People
mm-hmm.
can always tell when you're not in the moment. So for
Yeah.
me, my characters have to be in the moment. So I guess what happens is they come to me, I start writing, and when I sit down to write the first draft, all the thoughts that were there on the recorder hopefully are there in my head so I don't have to go back. And then I do start writing, but I
Mm-hmm.
rewrite and rewrite a lot. A lot.
Okay.
Yeah, before I have a full draft. I could
Yeah.
rewrite a chapter like 20 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of
Just
rewriting. And the thing about talking to the recorder is that things change as you start writing. So then some of that won't even fit what, because now you're writing a chapter and the chapter that came before may be very different from the ideas you had. So
yes.
it's a little schizophrenic, especially when it's a thriller.
Right. I know there's so many details to keep track of, like
Oh my
especially
God.
this last one. Like you had dual timelines, like there's a lot to
Right.
keep track of.
Well, I do dual timelines in all the books, but in this
Hmm.
case, I had the husband and the wife.
Yes.
So in Grace, it was just her point of view in two different time periods.
Yep.
Although one was first person, one was third. In First Victim, it was three points of view, but Man on the Train was very different because I did have the husband and wife, and it was the husband who had the bigger role at first. I
Yes.
wrote that to give the wife a bigger role because she started really talking to me.
That's so cool. So was the husband, is he like the first character that came to you then? Is that kind of how
Yeah.
that went?
He was the first character and he was really with me. It was my first male character and
Uh-huh.
he kind of emerged like full blown for me. I knew him. I knew where he worked. I knew his background. I knew how he felt when he got on the train. And so he was a very strong character for me.
Yeah.
And then when his wife started becoming involved, that changed some of how I was writing the story.
That's cool. Well, I mean, without spoiling it, did his past come to you? Like, was that like, did you know about the incidents that had happened when he was younger, or was it the present, him on the train?
That's a very good question. And because, of course, thrillers always have past, but that was
Yeah.
good because it's a good question because his past was there in my mind as
Okay.
I was writing him. And I knew how long ago and everything. Maybe not all the details, but I knew
Yeah.
because of certain things in his life. But that's really good. That's true.
Yeah.
It was there
Yeah.
for me. It was there. His
Yeah.
past and present were like both there.
That's cool. You mentioned in First Victim, you have a character who is a judge, and then in The Man on the Train, you have the wife Linda is a DA. So is there something that draws you to characters that are in the legal profession?
Absolutely. And it's funny because my editor, Louisa Cruz Smith, who I adore, said, You're drawn to authority figures because Grace is a sheriff in the first book. But another great question. My husband's a criminal defense attorney, and my
Nice.
father was a federal judge. And I don't know if that was all inside me, but I loved Perry Mason and I've always loved courtroom drama. Even though my husband says you wouldn't like most of the daily, it's not very
Right.
dramatic. So
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. And it's interesting because I'm my fourth book now, it's actually an idea for a series, and she's a criminal defense attorney. So I've got the judge, the
Ooh.
prosecutor. I am drawn to the courtroom. You're right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
love the dialogue too. And it's life and death, it's freedom, it's, the criminal trial. So
Yeah.
it's great drama, I think.
It is. It really is, especially in this one. I mean, it's in the synopsis, so it's not a spoiler, but the tension of a woman who is a DA, a district attorney, having a husband who is possibly a criminal, like that tension is so huge.
Right, right. And that's why I thought I knew she was a prosecutor. She had to be a
Mhm.
prosecutor. And that's
Mhm.
why that scene at breakfast where guy says, Well, or do you ever think anyone's innocent? And she says, Not a
Yes.
man.
I
So that,
highlighted that and I was like, "Oh, this is like a big part of the book."
yes, absolutely. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
it set it up so well.
Thank
So you were mentioning that some of the inspiration kind of comes from your husband then as well, and I saw in your acknowledgments that you thanked him for collaborating with you. So what does collaborating look like while you're like writing a book and he's kind of helping?
Well, it's interesting. He's great with marketing too, but I'll tell
Oh,
you,
nice.
with First Victim, I don't know if you've read that yet, and I won't give any
I-
spoilers away. I had written a draft, and he actually talked to me about a slow burn, that there shouldn't be something at the very beginning. There should be a slow burn. He was absolutely right.
Ooh.
In The Man on the Train, I have to tell you, Guy was in my head for a while. He's been in my
Uh-huh.
head for a while, a couple of years. He's been in my
Yeah.
head. I just didn't write that book right away. So
Mm-hmm.
my husband knew about him and he knew the story. And there's a huge reveal in it, as you know, one of the first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So originally I had that, and my husband said that's the whole book. To him, that was the whole book.
Mm.
I did subsequent drafts, gave them to my editor because things were changing, and
Okay.
things were changing, and that got a little lost. And
Okay.
my editor said to me, That's the whole story. This reveal here, that's what my husband told
Oh
me a
my
few years ago.
gosh.
That was the whole book, which when you and I talk, because there's a few reveals, and I want to make sure people are talking about the major, and
Yeah.
it's only a couple lines. And they both said, my husband and editor said, that's the whole book.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is. It is the crux of everything. Where like at the beginning, you do some cool stuff with timelines because it's kind of like it starts somewhere and then jumps back 2 weeks, or does it jump forward? I can't remember. There's a lot happening at the beginning, like with
Yes,
time. And like
right.
you're saying, you kind of think that he is the whole character. Um, and then as the story gets bigger, you're like, oh, that's why all of that mattered, and like that's why you told it to us that way.
Well, that's interesting because so here's the issue, and I'll probably ask your opinion, especially
Hmm.
when you read other books. Everyone talks about how man is fast paced, can't put it down, impossible, all that stuff. Okay.
Hmm.
And that's part of why I love mixing up timelines, but that's part of why I do that at the beginning.
Yeah.
And because it gets the reader invested immediately. So this idea for my next book is a series, and that's a very different kind of book because it's usually one
Yes.
character. And so my agent is saying to me, you're really known for suspense now and these kinds of
Mm-hmm.
books. Is that something you want to do? So that's something I need to think about because it's a story I want to tell. But if I can tell it the same way with the
Mm-hmm.
timelines and with the going back and forth that way and getting the
Mm-hmm.
reader invested, it really doesn't matter if it's a series character. And maybe it's a good thing because then people will follow her in
Yeah.
subsequent books.
Yeah.
So what do you
So what came to mind for me, there's a book, are you writing like is it not a thriller or is
It's a
it,
thriller. It's a thriller
it
mystery.
is.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. An example, there was a book I read called The Real Deal, at the beginning of the year. And it was like, it's kind of, I think in Goodreads, it's under chick lit or, like general fiction. But it was one where it felt like a thriller to me. Like I don't break out of thrillers very often, but it's a reality star who, or not a reality star, a girl who was on a reality show that was like Dance Moms, to quickly explain it, when she was a kid. And now as an adult, they're coming back for a reunion, and there's some mysterious reason that the show dramatically quit, but you don't know what it is. So it's told back and forth between present and past. And so like as the reunion's happening, then you start to find out like the big bad thing that happened that stopped the show. So that was one where like doing it that way does still keep me like really engaged, and it felt like reading a thriller. So I mean, I'm always someone who is for back and forth timelines.
Well, in Saving Grace, it's funny. The first draft I wrote in a linear way, and it ended,
Mm-hmm.
knew who the killer was, and then it went to the present. And I realized that if I went back and forth, because the older Grace was talking to me, if I went back and forth in time and then it met at around in the present part two,
Yes.
keeps the reader in suspension. And it really, really works for me that way. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I love, I always seem to have dual timelines and I seem to
Mm-hmm.
be able to flip effortlessly into them. Although my editor said it's good if you put years just because you want to make sure the reader follows. But I
Yes.
really love that. Like it's their mind and it's going back, but in memory, I love all that. I really do. And I
Yes.
think that even in a series, and this idea is in New York and Florida because I need someone on death row.
Ooh.
So, yeah. And I think there's a unifying theme that could carry forward in all the books. But yes, it's a thriller and it's still a whodunit and
Yeah.
we still don't know. And there's dual timelines, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. So I think it's the same idea. But I think you're absolutely right. You need to get the reader invested immediately. And if
Mm-hmm.
they're invested and they're not sure what's happening, but they want to find out what that means, it will keep them
Mm-hmm.
reading. Even
Yeah.
though you don't plan that as a writer, you just write. You can't like
Yeah.
say, "I'm gonna do this."
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask. With this one, did you write it linearly? So like, did you write his backstory? Well, I mean, there's her story too, but like, did you write his backstory and then the present, or did you write it the way the book happens time wise?
I wrote it the way the book happens,
Oh,
time wise.
wow.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, yes. And then I discovered more things than,
Okay.
and then there's a cop's point of view, which I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
sure. Suddenly I realized I need his point of view. So
Yeah.
yes, it really worked. For some reason, this really worked for me because it's a lot about memory.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, he's trying to remember, but you don't even know where he is, which is why it's good to have the wife investigating instead of him
Yes.
trying to remember because you don't know what's going on now. Where is he? That
Yeah.
kind of thing. But it worked for me in this way, going back and forth. It really did.
Yeah. Yeah. It really has, we've been talking about the suspense with it, but it really has the Hitchcockian suspense like underneath it. Like from the beginning, Gare Billings is the one who told me like you have to go request this on NetGalley. And so he was like, you're gonna be obsessed with it. So I was texting him the whole time I was reading it. But at the beginning, I was like, even before we kind of had like a full grasp of what happened in the past and how it was connected. I was telling him, I was like, it just feels so eerie and like something is just wrong, kind of like in all of the scenes. So, how
Mhm.
did you approach like fitting that kind of level of like creepy eeriness into like all of the scenes?
Funny, that's what I was told that about Saving Grace. It's really
Yeah.
funny. Um, where girls disappear in two different time periods. That again, that's not something you can like think about or plan.
Okay.
Um, I think maybe it's like a feeling and it's a sentiment and it's there and it's in my
Mhm.
feelings, so it's in the character's feelings. Maybe it has to do with being in the moment. I
Mhm.
know it is an eerie quality because you don't quite know what's going on and the characters might not know.
Mhm.
So, I don't know how. I don't know
Yeah.
what to tell you. It's interesting because people have said
Yeah.
that about my
Yeah.
books. Victim too.
Yes.
Victim too.
Yeah. I definitely felt it for sure.
Why?
Um, I think some of it was because, like, at the beginning too, like you can just tell that their marriage is in a weird place, and it's kind of cool since you're in both perspectives because you have what he's thinking about her, and then what she's thinking about him is different, but you can kind of see how they're both thinking those things. So how did you kind of approach writing their marriage?
Well, it's funny that chapter I wasn't even expecting. But Guy woke up and I knew he was going to have breakfast with Linda, and
Uh-huh.
that kind of just wrote itself because it hadn't really been in my mind to show a marriage. And people say you're, portraying a marriage as well. But all the pieces seem, I think sometimes, Kate, that things are unconscious in your mind. And then
Yeah.
sometimes when I write, something happens and I say, oh my God, that fit perfectly with that image or how could that be? So I
Yes.
wonder if subconsciously we're doing things that we're not aware of
Yeah.
because this scene kind of just like wrote itself.
Yes.
Yeah, and I love when that happens. So
Yeah.
I guess our minds, if you keep your mind on what you're doing and
Yeah.
the story and the characters, I really think something, I don't want to sound too mystical, but something
No,
happens,
do it.
like the synopsis
Yeah.
just
That's what
fire.
I've been doing this 1,000 words of summer challenge with one of my friends, Hallie Sutton. And uh what's funny is you were saying you didn't want to sound too mystical. She and I were talking about it last night and she was like, I don't want to sound like woo woo about it. I'm like, no, but like it is sometimes when like you're like, I had it happen last night where I like didn't know what I was gonna start writing. And then when I got to the end of it, something I had written at like the beginning of it, like played together. And I was like, that is so wild that like maybe my brain was there, even though like I didn't know it.
I think so. Isn't that it's so, and sometimes it just, I wish I could think of an example now. It happened in another book, but it was like so
Uh-huh.
perfect. I couldn't believe
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
couldn't believe how well it worked. So,
Hmm.
but I guess from there things take off and they build because now you have this marriage. And that really
Yeah.
worked for me with Linda in Montauk because she's having all these thoughts about her husband who doesn't even has no idea where he is. And I gave it a fictional name. And just to
Hmm.
let you know, it's happened in all my books. My editor said, because you're changing anything you're changing, like having an abandoned lighthouse, which
Hmm.
isn't in Montauk. She said you have to have a fictional town because readers will write in and tell you all the things you got wrong.
What's interesting was I Googled the town because I was like, sometimes it's like, what did I just read? I had just read a book that took place in Greece. And so, like, I was Googling a bunch of stuff because I've never been to Greece. And so I'm just like getting the image in my head. And so then when I was reading yours, I Googled it and I was like, I don't think this is real. Never mind.
Oh my God. Well, I will tell you that the Montaukett Indians settled
Uh-huh.
Montauk, but it's not, I had many different names and Cape, but Manitowoc isn't one, but I thought
Hmm.
it's close enough for people to know, especially if it's the easternmost. There are no other towns after
Yeah.
Montauk. It's the
Yeah.
easternmost edge of Long Island.
Yeah.
And my editor said you can use other real towns like Amagansett, where I actually lived for 20 years.
Hmm.
And you can say Route 27. I said, shouldn't I make
Hmm.
it all fictional? So it's funny how some is fictional and like New York's real, Scarsdale's
Yeah.
real, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was going to ask too. So most of your books take place in New York or even like Manhattan. Have you lived there like most of your life? It sounds like you have.
Yeah, I have. I've
Yeah.
been here most of my life. And Scarsdale is 10 minutes from where I grew up in Yonkers, which is
Mm,
very close to the city. And I'm trying to think where else. The place in First Victim, Lowood, is all the way upstate. I was never that far upstate.
yeah.
And I've never been to Northwest Arkansas in Saving Grace.
Yeah.
But I
Me
did a
neither.
lot of I did a lot of research. People have asked me, your first book, The South, what an 11-year-old orphan in the South, where'd that come from? And they can't believe I've never been there.
Yeah. You're like, I don't know, it just came to me.
And then, a lot of it for me, while I describe it and do the research, a lot of it's emotional and it's the
Mm-hmm.
universality of emotion. So it almost doesn't matter where it is. It's
Yeah.
the character's perspective on the place too.
Yeah.
That colors everything.
Right. It really does. I have a silly question because when I was reading, I also texted Gare and I was like, I really feel like there's a missed opportunity to call this the guy on the train.
So
Was
funny.
was that ever on the table?
No, in fact, my publisher said, "Could we call it the man from Montauk to get all the Hampton readers?" I said, "But he's not from Montauk," and
Oh
that's
yeah.
like a quiet literary book, a little more. But
Yeah.
what's funny is maybe because I'd never written a guy's perspective, that's why I
Yeah.
called him Guy.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's why he was called Guy, actually. And so yeah, I never thought of that, but that makes sense. The
Yeah.
guy on the train.
Yeah. So you did Guy is also he's kind of well, he just is bookish himself.
Yeah.
And he like there are a lot of books, there are multiple books that are mentioned in the story. And it's kind of a two-pronged question here, but were they all books that you really loved too, or did it just feel like books that would fit what Guy would be interested in?
It was more fitting what he'd be interested
Hmm.
in. That's a very good question.
Hmm.
And two of them by two authors in the book were part of it. You knew why they were there.
Yes. That's
Also.
what I didn't know how to ask that question without spoiling it, but it was one of them intentional in a way to interpret the ending.
Yes, you mean the climactic scene. Yes,
Yes. Yes.
absolutely. And
Okay.
how
That's
Linda would figure out where he is,
yeah. Yep.
Yes. And also in his early conversations on the
Hmm.
train, very first scene, we
Yep.
talk about the classic authors, and one of them he mentions train. Well, you know
Hmm.
that. So yeah,
Yes.
that kind of all worked. That all really worked for especially because
Yeah.
name of the character.
Yeah, it really did. It also inspired me because as I was reading it, I needed a podcast topic for something I was recording with someone. And I was like, oh, bookish characters. It's always fun when you're like reading a book and like one of the characters is like mentions that they like to read too. So we're doing like a whole episode on um our favorite bookish characters in books. So
Oh, I like
yeah,
that. That's so
I
cool.
know. It is fun. So you said that you read a lot. Is there anything that you've read recently that you loved?
Um, oh, that's a good question. I haven't had time to like do a lot of reading
Yeah.
lately. So busy writing. And you have to be promoting, doing book signings, but I love a really well-written thriller. It has to be a thriller or psychological suspense. What have I read recently? I mean, there's so many authors I love.
Yeah.
But was there something, it's not that reason. I always like B.A. Paris, her first book.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read
Yes.
Behind Closed Doors.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
To me, everything's that last sentence, the last paragraph. It's just that
Yes.
blows you away.
It does.
And I mean, there's so many really great books. I used to love, oh, well, I love Defending Jacob, which I read years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm going to think of more. I just
Oh
must
yeah.
blew me away recently. I have to think about it and I'll get back to you on that. But as
Oh,
long
that's
as
okay.
it's a really well-written book,
Yes.
It's a mystery and suspense. I enjoyed The Plot by Jean Corlitz. Remember that was
Oh yeah, I haven't read it, but a lot of people recommend it.
yeah. I mean, it's not like the thrillers we're talking about, but it's all about. I like things about publishing,
Writing. Yeah.
about um, and I think years ago, Olivia Goldsmith wrote something called The Bestseller. And I remember
Oh,
this,
okay.
they're trying to fire her and like she won't leave her office. They're trying to pull her out. I like books about the industry too,
Yes.
but I certainly love unreliable narrators.
Oh yeah, me
So I
too.
like plays on that and different things. I
Hmm.
know. What am I saying? I did read a great book.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be doing an in conversation with him at
Ooh,
Mysterious
nice.
Bookshop a week from today. AJ Finn.
Oh yes, his new
So
one.
his new one came out, End of Story. He just came back from like a worldwide tour.
Hmm.
And this is what I mean about it's very hard to write a book a year. This was like 6 or 7 years, which is what I'd like to do.
Right.
And this book is amazing. And he
Oh, that's good to
has
know.
a lot of allusions to Hitchcock and Christie. I mean, and he knows
Ooh,
the old authors, but and his sentences are beautiful, unbelievable.
yes.
Word. That's the last great book I read, and I will say, great book, and a huge, shocking reveal at the end.
Man, I need to prioritize that one.
Yes.
The Woman in the Window was just
Oh, I loved it, and
fantastic.
I told him this, like I've told many authors, like
Hmm.
Downing when I read My Lovely Wife. I never knew them, and I wasn't published yet when I read their books, and I was
Yeah.
so impressed by The Woman in the Window because the writing
Yes.
is so great,
So
and
good.
again the twists, it was great. So if you love
Hmm.
that, you'll love End of Story.
Okay. I
Really,
definitely need to,
really
yeah, I
great.
need to read that one.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, My Lovely Wife, like I read same as you probably. I read it years ago and I
Yes,
still talk about it like all
yes,
the time.
yes.
I love that book.
I know. I picked it up off a table and just started reading it because it looked
Yeah.
interesting. Cover was great.
Yeah. It's amazing. So you are working on another one, so there will be more to come.
Yes, absolutely.
Good.
I speak with my editor, see what she thinks. It
Yep.
could be a standalone, but I think it could definitely be
Yeah.
a series. And it's
Yeah.
expanding out. I'm in Florida 6 months a year. So
Oh,
I
okay.
do events and author tours there. And what's great is half the new book will be set there. So
Yes.
that gives me an opportunity to have a new state, a new place to,
Yeah.
and again,
That
it's
is so cool.
back and forth and it's the law, which I love.
Yes, more of the law. That's good.
Yes,
Well, I can't wait for this next one to come out, and you'll have to come back on the podcast. So,
absolutely. This is great. This is
yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on and talking about it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I'm so glad you enjoyed the book. And thank you for
Oh,
your,
yeah.
I still reread it. Thank you so,
Yes. Yes.
we're not supposed to read reviews, but like actors, but it's hard not.
Yeah. Oh, I would imagine.
I know. It's like, you don't want to read the bad ones, only the good ones.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, we have lots of good reviews of your book on this side of the podcast.
Thanks so much.